Hello and welcome to the Northern Slant Hosts, our new interview series. Today I am joined by someone with over 20 years experience in economics, holds a wealth of board positions across Northern Ireland, is on the Infrastructure Minister's Infrastructure Advisory Panel, and is Associate Director of the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre. Richard Johnston, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, looking forward to the chat.
Indeed. I suppose getting right into it, Ulster University Economic Policy Centre has done a lot of work this year reporting on the impact of COVID-19 on the NI economy. I attended one of your webinars in the summer and we spoke briefly afterwards, and you said that you hoped it wasn't too gloomy for me. We've moved on a little bit since then, but what has been the impact on the economy of COVID-19, and what are we looking at next year?
Yeah, well, I suppose now we're beginning to get data that can actually illustrate the impact on the economy of COVID-19. So we're beginning to get actual data for unemployment, for employment and economic inactivity.
Yeah.
What we would estimate is that output, the size of the economy, contracted by say 10 to 12%. So the definition of a depression is minus 10% from peak to trough. So there's certainly the potential that Northern Ireland could have entered its first depression. So a very rapid and very deep recession, much more rapid and deeper than the 2008 recession. It took about 5 quarters to unfold and was about 5% in terms of the full contraction. At this stage, we reckon it's 10 to 12% and really did unfold over a few weeks.
Wow.
So far, there's maybe around 20,000 fewer people employed. Unemployment's doubled and there's about 15,000 more economically inactive. Now, what's actually really good is that the labour market has held up much better than we thought at the outset. So that's primarily due to the likes of the coronavirus job retention scheme and the self-employed income support scheme. So those schemes have actually kept people with their employers, and the labour market impact has been much better than we thought. You've seen a massive digital acceleration as we move online to work and learn and socialise. And there's also a much greater focus on environmental impacts and social responsibility. What we've seen here is a massive disruption added to the other disruptions that society is facing. So hopefully over the next year now we can begin to look forward as a vaccine program rolls out and some parts of the economy can get back to normal. As with any disruption, there are winners and losers. The winners tend to go quietly about their business in terms of doing well, and the losers are obviously quite vocal in terms of getting support from government to try and maintain their incomes and their homes and that sort of thing. So very understandably. So the winners would be things like cybersecurity, logistics and trades, for example, and then certainly smaller shops and villages and towns as spending has moved outside the key cities and towns. Savers too have done pretty well. The UK savings ratio went up to about 30%. So there are a lot of people who are paying down debt and saving for a rainy day. In terms of vulnerability, that's something that we've focused on in the Economic Policy Centre. So certain sectors have become much more vulnerable. So sectors that require a lot of face-to-face engagement and socialisation. So arts, entertainment, tourism, leisure, restaurants and hotels have all been hit quite hard, and then certain geographies as well. So the centre of our towns and cities have certainly struggled. Young people who are starting out in the job that they want, they're starting jobs potentially in restaurants or retail would no longer be available to them. Older workers who are maybe not as digitally enabled have also suffered, as have those with low formal qualifications and consequently lower incomes on average. And then council areas like Causeway Coast and Glens and Fermanagh and Omagh, which have a high proportion of tourism. So geographically, by age group and by certain sector and occupation, there are a lot of quite different impacts across society. So if you're an IT programmer, COVID has probably been quite good for you. However, if you work in retail or a hotel, then obviously COVID's been a huge challenge.
Yeah, and you mentioned the job retention schemes and the various support offerings that the government have put forward and how that's impacted on the job market. Is that masking a problem that's going to sort of unleash itself next year?
Well, I suppose in terms of masking a problem, it's certainly a very real problem that we have to face in society, and it's better that we keep people as close to the employers as possible at this stage. Those schemes will come to an end, or will come to an end for certain sectors at some stage. And what we would expect is that you will begin to see a feed on to unemployment and inactivity. Perhaps they'll be tapered out. They'll be tapered out for certain sectors, but these are huge policy interventions at a UK level between the job retention scheme, the self-employment scheme, and the business intervention loans. Of course, we have our own interventions here in Northern Ireland in terms of rates relief, hardship payments, and digital training courses and things like that. So there's, the policy framework so far has really spared nothing in terms of its response to COVID. It's been pretty remarkable, and a lot of things have been done in policy terms that we thought wouldn't have had a chance in the past. What I think in the future is that a lot of these will have to wind down because of the public expenditure and the taxation implications of those programs. But again, what the government has shown is it's willing to help those who are in most need. So I think there'll certainly be other forms of programs that will be brought in over the next year then to try and help those who continue to see serious vulnerabilities as a result of COVID.
Yeah, and you mentioned those particular vulnerabilities that Northern Ireland faces in different sectors and regional disparities and skills gap and sort of a high level of unemployment. How much is that going to impact on our recovery even compared to the rest of the UK?
Well, I suppose we've got to bear in mind Northern Ireland has traditionally lagged a little bit behind the UK, so we have a larger public sector and a smaller private sector. So you'd think that would in some ways insulate Northern Ireland as well, because the relatively larger public sector hasn't changed. Health, education, universities, public service. We've all continued to do our jobs, maybe in a different location, and be paid the same amount. So that should insulate Northern Ireland, and particularly, say, areas like, for instance, Down City and Strabane that has a larger public sector than some of the other councils, and would traditionally be more deprived. There is an insulating factor just because of the structure of the Northern Ireland economy. That said, if you look at arts, entertainment, culture, restaurants, hotels, they do employ quite a large proportion of our employees as well. So I would say for certain sectors, it could take maybe almost a decade to get back to where they were in the past. For the economy as a whole, it might take sort of 3 to 5 years. And there's a whole range of uncertainties out there that mean we can't really predict exactly what the future will hold. Economic forecasting's got a lot tougher over the last few years, and not least because we haven't got the data for 2020, and we won't have output data for 2020 until December 21. So the speed of official stats means that it's quite a challenge to estimate what might happen over the next year. So it is tough, but we need to make the best estimate of where we're going in the economy, and then ensure that those that are most vulnerable get the policy and the support that's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about uncertainty, and I'll preface this by a health warning in that at the time of recording, we're still awaiting any or no result as the negotiations of Brexit, which I think times us in at about 2016 to 2056 probably. How much can we separate out the impact of COVID from potential impact of Brexit?
I think it's going to be incredibly challenging to disentangle the two. So what you've got here are two massive disruptions. So COVID is the largest disruption faced by the economy in Northern Ireland in its history. Brexit's an additional disruption, and a lot of the forecast or estimates would have been for a contraction of the economy by around 4 or 5%. So when you add that to COVID, then obviously it's a significant challenge. What we've got going on in the background is other megatrends that were already happening. So we've got an aging population, there's the climate emergency, there's the fourth industrial revolution. All of these things impacted on Northern Ireland's competitiveness and our economy prior to COVID, and have been accelerated because of COVID. So, I think really we're in a situation now where it's almost disruptions have been cubed. And as I've said before, disruptions will create both winner and losers. So we're not really going to hear too much from the winners. They'll go on winning quite quietly. But those who are negatively impacted would lobby quite hard for support, as we all would. We don't really know what's going to happen with the deal or no deal and the discussions that are going on at this point in time. But if there's no deal, Northern Ireland will at least stay as part of the EU, will still have access to the single market, which is good from a continuity of trade perspective, and it puts NI in a much better place than other parts of the UK. So, not saying that that's a silver lining, but it's certainly a benefit of a situation that isn't great.
Yeah.
What we'll see undoubtedly is that there are frictions and costs that will increase some prices of goods coming in from GB. So there will be some substitution effects. You'll see consumers potentially buying goods and services from the south that they might have got from GB in the past. And then in terms of trade diversion as well, so it may be easier for companies to export to Germany by going through the south rather than using the UK land bridge as well. So I think what you're going to see is certainly higher prices for certain goods, a bit of trade diversion, and certainly those frictions could lead to some more challenges. Seen the news recently that logistics companies aren't taking orders to deliver to Northern Ireland, and that's really until they work out exactly what the arrangements are and what the costs are, and whether or not they can pass them on to the consumer. But ultimately, about 60% of the Northern Ireland economy is made up of consumption. The rest is business investment, government, and trade. But consumers are going to end up paying higher prices for a range of goods as we look into the new post-Brexit world, I think.
Yeah, from the health of the economy to the economy of health. Ulster University published a report entitled Health, Equality in the Economy, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. And it sort of looks at context of healthcare and transformation, social care, health tech and mental health. And you have a chapter in there entitled The Cost of Healthcare. I mean, the issues around healthcare in Northern Ireland aren't exactly new. We're lining up to the festive period. So in that spirit, we've had 5 reviews, 4 sets of experts, 3 assembly terms, 2 intractable parties, and an executive in a pear tree, or at least one incapable of implementing healthcare reform. In your chapter, you say that money matters alongside so much more. And I think that's true. There's been, it's the health sector seems to be in an unsustainable way. Do you want to run through the key points of the report and from your chapter particularly?
Yeah, it's a great report to work with a range of colleagues from across the University of Ulster in terms of mental health and all the other elements of care that takes place in Northern Ireland. But what we find from the cost of delivering healthcare is that we do generally spend more than most other parts of the UK on delivering healthcare, and that's on a per capita basis. So we're not necessarily underfunded. We have much longer waiting lists. We have serious issues with capital investment backlogs. And realistically, yes, more money will help solve a few ills, but realistically, if you look at the Bangor report, if you look at all the other strategies and publications,
there's been enough of them.
What needs to happen with the healthcare sector? There are so many other elements that need to come together now for healthcare reform, and some of those are quite difficult decisions, and they're quite locally, politically challenging as well. So where, for example, would a cancer or heart disease centre of excellence be located? And how would you deliver very high quality services on a very specialised basis in 1 or 2 locations across Northern Ireland? So obviously that means more travelling for people. It means fewer very local hospitals. It also means a lot more care in the community and people residing at home. But a lot of those decisions do need to be taken because we can't continue spending more and having sort of worse healthcare outcomes.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a more of a as you say, it's more of a political issue than a policy or even funding issue. And I know that prior to COVID, the health minister Robin Swan was making an announcement or a speech, and I know Christopher Stalford, the DUP MLA, had said, look, we need to provide cover for the minister in delivering healthcare reforms because it's not sustainable the way it's set up at the minute, and it does become difficult for each MLA in each area. And I mean, I worked for an MLA for a while during Edwin Poots's term as health minister, and you can see firsthand on the ground it is a really difficult debate to have. And is that political? Is it just a political issue that needs to be dealt with? We know the issues.
Yeah, look, it's absolutely a political hot potato. So I do feel for anybody that is representing a constituency that may have local healthcare services potentially moved or removed. So those are huge challenges, and certainly I wouldn't want to be an MLA or a councillor who's taking away some of those services or being involved in decisions or votes on some of those services, because obviously they matter an awful lot to people, especially in a COVID environment where healthcare and the capability and capacity of the entire system has come under quite a lot of scrutiny in recent months. So I wouldn't underestimate the challenge of making those hard decisions, and I do feel for the people that are tasked with making them. But I think as we look into the future of healthcare in Northern Ireland, it needs to be different. And as you said, Minister Swan was already faced with a healthcare system that was creaking and needed significant reform. And then COVID hit. So it really wasn't the place where you'd have wanted to start from, having taken that job on.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose taking a little bit of a step back, we have an executive again. We've had one for about a year now. There are significant bandwidth issues at the minute dealing with impact of Brexit and COVID. But if we could put them aside just for a second, what could the executive do in broad terms to boost economic development generally in Northern Ireland? Is it things like investing in skills, or providing infrastructure development, things like that? What could really give the Northern Ireland economy a shot in the arm?
Yeah, and I suppose that's absolutely key at the minute, is that we A, deal with COVID, and B, look at all the other plates that the executive has to spin in the air at the same time as well. So, COVID has taken over a lot of the civil service time and a lot of the emotional bandwidth as well, and logistical bandwidth of those dealing with all of the decisions. But if you look at the economy and society in the longer term, we do need to deal with social issues, we do need to deal with environmental issues, and we do need to focus on the economy. So it's with COVID, and I think we need to learn to live with COVID and through COVID over the next number of years. The executive could do a range of things. We've just published a competitiveness report as well, about a week or so ago. And what that found is that we have an education system that has improved over the last 2 decades. But other competitor nations have improved more rapidly. And what that means is that Northern Ireland is slipping further behind. So we would say quite often that we have a world-class education system in Northern Ireland. That's probably no longer the case. We have lower levels of literacy, scientific and numeracy ability than other competitor nations across Europe. That's going to be a challenge for bringing in FDI in the future, for getting jobs, for living in a more digital environment, all of those sorts of things. We also have low levels of innovation. We have really, really high healthcare and childcare costs. So it's more expensive to work and look after your children in the UK and Ireland than it is in any other part of the UK. So we're top of the table in some of those things that we don't really want to top the table in.
Yeah.
What can the executive do? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So the executive could invest quite heavily in terms of the education system, in terms of looking at the curriculum for working in the fourth industrial revolution, a more digitized curriculum, looking at the skills that are not easily automatable. So those are the human skills like strategy, empathy, leadership, all of those sort of soft stroke human skills. And then the technical stroke hard skills of coding, data analytics, and cyber, and all of those sorts of things as well. You've had that massive move. The other thing we could do is looking at the green revolution. So how could we actually support a much greener society in the future? We import an awful lot of heavy oils for heating and transport. Those are 2 areas where Northern Ireland is really, really poor. And if there's a significant oil price hike, it means that society suffers quite a bit in Northern Ireland in terms of fuel poverty. There's a huge opportunity there for electric or hydrogen vehicles, for moving away from oils. There's a massive opportunity in terms of retrofitting homes, and again, moving away from oil-based and gas-based heating. But that needs a concerted energy strategy that's properly thought out and costed. And again, I do feel for a lot of the officials working in this area, because with the history of RHI, I think it's going to be probably quite a challenging and slow process. And a lot of the models and the spreadsheets are going to be examined in massive detail, which could slow up the process. So there's a lot could be done. Yeah. So the executive could also look at taking equity in certain companies and maybe giving them enough breathing space effectively to take equity or give a loan, where that would get them to the point next year of where they're actually they have enough money to get over the hump and the worst of the recession, and then they can pay back the loan or buy back the equity in the future. So there's quite a lot that can be done.
Absolutely. And forgive me, this is going to be a long question, but bear with me. I was watching a film at the weekend, The Big Short. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about the housing market and the housing crash in 2008, starring Ryan Gosling and Steve Carell. All the Slant hosts doing economic policy and film reviews all in one. But one of the things that they did in the film is they had celebrities explaining the technical aspects of the housing and financial markets. And in one part, they had the economist Richard Thaler and the pop star Selena Gomez talking about subprime mortgage markets using blackjack as an analogy. Now, you're a behavioral economist, so you'll know that Richard Thaler's an excellent communicator of all things economics and has had a practical impact on even the UK with the behavioral insight team in the Nudge unit. Economics is hard and it's complex and it's gloomy at times, as we discussed over the last few minutes. We've had Michael Gove said, we've had enough of experts, and some of that gloom that we've talked about in relation to Brexit will be met with just shrugs from a great swathe of the population. I mean, how do we overcome communicating economics effectively? Because it seems like quite a challenge.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a challenge. We're trying to communicate, a large amount of data, data-driven analysis to people and make it clear and concise and quick. Thaler, very, very interesting in terms of what's been done across the world in terms of behavioral economics over the last decade or so. Cass Sunstein was brought into the White House to advise on nudge economics in Obama's time. So, this is a massive area that has moved ahead across the rest of the world. The UK has the behavioral insights team, and hopefully now in April we'll be moving forward with behavioral insights with DFC. So we'll have to thank people like Tracy Mahard, the permanent secretary, Beverly Wall, who's a deputy secretary, and Gillian Callan, who's their economist in there. So we've been working with them actually to try and create a behavioral economics unit and give that extra gear to policy in Northern Ireland. So if you take the likes of the competitiveness report, there's over 100,000 data points in that research. And my job is then to distill that down to maybe 5 or 6 or 7 charts that are relevant and interesting to the audience. It's about making sure that I know the audience, I can appreciate their perspective, and what we need to get out of that information. So for us, it's infographics, it's podcasts, it's chats like this, TV programs, and it's all about making economics more accessible. We don't need to be using jargon or complicated terms. If we can get things across in a very straightforward way, then it's better that people get 5 or 6 of the points rather than being sort of dazzled by all of the science.
Yeah, and it is hard. Well, if any other economists want to come on to the Northern Slant hosts and talk to us, we'd be more than happy to help out. Well, Richard, it's been great to speak to you. Really, really appreciate it. Really insightful discussion, particularly on the economics in relation to COVID. So thanks very much for speaking to us this afternoon.
No worries, and thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. Yeah, this is one of the first in our series of Northern Slant hosts. We're hoping to do a few more, which you'll be able to find on our website and by looking up our social media. So keep an eye out for those. And in the meantime, Richard, thanks very much again.
Okay, thanks, Roger.